Hello everyone and welcome back to another informational video, and today we are covering a topic that I recently thought of and I thought it would make for a fun video, and that is extremely bizarre and really random Nintendo games that kind of just came out of nowhere and no one expected. Now before I begin, I would like to say, just because a game is bizarre and random does not mean it is bad, and a lot of the time a bizarre game can be really good, like, you know, Banjo-Kazooie, which isn't on this list because it's developed by Rare, is a really good N64 game, probably one of my favourites, but it is really weird and bizarre, and that's why I like it. But of course, just because the game is weird and random does not mean it is necessarily good. So today we're going over some of the highlights that I've noticed and reviewing them. First we will begin with the sort of, you know, Nintendo's first home console, the NES. Now I only have the NES Classic Edition, but I've played my fair share of NES games and so I have a decent enough knowledge on it to talk about it. Super Mario Bros. 2 is a sequel to Super Mario Bros. And it completely went off the formula of the first game. It's still a platformer, but apart from that, it's totally its own thing. And that is because it was its own thing in the Japanese release. It was a completely different game called Doki Doki Panic, but when they ported it to America, they decided to make that Super Mario Bros. 2. In Japan, Super Mario Bros. 2 is essentially more Mario Bros. Levels, which eventually got a US and European release in the form of Super Mario All-Stars. The basic game mechanics of Super Mario Bros. 2 is, instead of just jumping on enemies' head, you pull up turnips and throw them at enemies. And most of the enemies are Shy Guys. You can play as Mario, Toad, Peach and Luigi, and the main villain is Wart, a frog person who has captured some fairies, which is obviously, you know, a big precursor to Super Mario 3D World, which is basically the exact same formula, except it's a bit more normal and has Bowser as the main villain and is more normal. Now, although I think, you know, it's good for what it is, but it is probably my least favourite of the Super Mario Bros. NES games. You know, it's not bad by any means, but it gets a bit boring at times, and yeah. But it definitely deserves its place on this list because it's really weird. Another really random and bizarre game was on the Super Nintendo, which, yes, again, Super Nintendo Classic, and that was Tetris Attack. Now, from just the name alone, you'd probably imagine, you know, it was some kind of Tetris game with maybe some fighting mechanics or something like that, which sounds bizarre on its own, but it's somehow even weirder. It's its completely own thing, completely unrelated to Tetris whatsoever, with Yoshis. This had a bit of a severe case of Mario Bros. 2-itis, because again, it was a completely different game in Japan. I believe it had fairies or something, and then they changed the name to Tetris Attack and put a Yoshi's in it. Okay, sure. The name Tetris Attack was just made for marketing, as back then no one really knew how the copyright system worked for video games, and I think it got discontinued after the rights to Tetris kind of got properly owned by someone. I actually haven't played it since it's not on the Super Nintendo Classic, because I assume copyright and all that, but like, I think they could have changed the name to Puzzle League and just left it at that, but whatever. But it definitely looks very odd for a game called Tetris Attack with Yoshis. Next we're moving down a generation to a cartridge that I actually have on the original Game Boy, and that is Super Mario Land. Now, this is another pretty simple 2D Mario platformer, and it's probably a bit normal Super Mario Bros. 2, but it's still quite weird because, well, there are loads of themes in this game that just never returned. Mario says Daisy for once from Sarasa Land instead of the Mushroom Kingdom, and also the main boss is some kind of alien thing. I forget the name, but it's something really weird. So it's basically a platformer in space, not Super Mario Galaxy. The fireballs bounce off walls, the Koopa shells explode after you jump on them, and there are also these, I didn't even know, these kind of like monkey enemies that, like, I guess they're kind of like dry bones because when you jump on them they stay out for a few seconds then come back, but like, what are they, people or monkeys or I don't even know. I think they might be ninjas, but in that case, is Mario assaulting people by stomping on them? That's kind of messed up, Mario. Skipping ahead a couple of generations to the Nintendo 64. The first game we're going to be talking about is the only really weird N64 game that I own, which technically, this kind of shouldn't be on this list in a way, because it's developed by Rare, but it's got the licensing to Nintendo and characters, so I think it's close enough, and that is Diddy Kong Racing. Now, a racing game with Donkey Kong characters, it might not seem that weird at first, until you play the game, and that's when you find out that it's not Diddy Kong Racing, it's Rareware Racing. So all the Rareware characters, like Banjo and Conker and some other random crocodile dudes, and Diddy Kong. This was really weird. It doesn't even have Donkey Kong in, so it's kind of weird how it's called Diddy Kong Racing, expecting it to be a Donkey Kong-esque game with, like, I don't know, King K. Rool Donkey Kong, maybe Cranky Kong, Dixie Kong, or heck, maybe even Funky Kong. But no, it's really weird and bizarre. But you know what? It's really good. It might be one of my favorite racing games. I'm not even joking. There's even a remake of it on the DS, so everyone clearly likes it, me included. It's just ass weird. Another game developed by Rareware but using Nintendo characters that I thought good enough to put on this list is Star Fox Adventures. Now, this game was a bit of a disappointment to a lot of people that really wanted a sequel to Star Fox 64, because, you know, everyone loved that game and they really wanted a new and improved sequel with crazy looking good GameCube graphics, but instead they got a 3D adventure game kind of like Zelda but with Star Fox characters. And to be honest, it's not very good. I mean, I can kind of see why people would like it, just, you know, if they went in expecting a adventure 3D open world game with dinosaurs, then I'm sure you'll like it. Now, obviously I wasn't born when this came out, so, you know, I did go into it expecting that. It's not really that bad, and it 100% deserved the spot on this list, because, well, it's Star Fox, but it's not. There's, like, the only flying portions is when you're traveling to the level to play in a 3D open world kind of area with a magic wand and dinosaurs. It's really weird. One of the weirdest things about the N64 library is that it had loads of Pokemon spin-off games, but no mainline Pokemon games. It's kind of a running theme to only have Pokemon games on handheld consoles, but, like, in the mid-90s when the N64 released, this was, like, at the height of the Pokemon craze. Everyone loved Pokemon, and an actual proper Pokemon game would have done so well on the N64, and probably would have saved the platform, honestly. But no, instead, they just got loads and loads of spin-offs that were pretty good, but probably not as good as just a normal Pokemon game. But I guess they just wanted to have it on the go all the time. The one exception to this rule is when it released on the Switch, but even that, you know, it's a handheld console, but also a home console. Now, they released a ton of Pokemon spin-offs, but the ones that stick out as being really weird are Hey You Pikachu and Pokemon Snap. Pokemon Snap was an on-rail photography game, which apparently people really like. I have not played it, sadly, but there's a ton of nostalgia for it, and apparently it's just a really good game. Enough to even get a sequel on the Switch, New Pokemon Snap. And I gotta say, it does look like pretty cool gameplay. It might seem pretty dull at first if you're just hearing it's about taking photos of Pokemon, but there's loads of little challenges that you can do, and different kind of shots give you better points. And it looks really fun. But again, this was really weird for a Pokemon game, but the other Pokemon spin-off that was not received well was Hey You Pikachu, which apparently this game is absolutely garbage, and that's all thanks to the N64 microphone. You know, the microphone that doesn't work. Like, it barely picks up any noises, and when it does, it can definitely not make out any words. Hey You Pikachu's game mechanics is essentially almost like an adventure game, but you have to talk to Pikachu, and it doesn't look very good. Even if the microphone did work, I still don't think it would be that good of a game. The GameCube had absolutely loads of bizarre games on it, and another one of those is Luigi's Mansion. Now, as of now, Luigi's Mansion probably seems pretty normal to everyone, because, you know, there's 3 sequels, loads of people grew up with it, including myself, and it just seems like it's been pretty normalized now. Back in 2001, I mean, Mario games, apart from the odd sports or party spin-off, most single-player, primarily Mario games, are always platformers. And then all of a sudden they come out with a game about Luigi, which already is out of the ordinary. And then we got a strategy adventure game about catching ghosts. Like, what? Now, although being a blatant ripoff of Ghostbusters, it's honestly one of my favourite Nintendo games, and probably my favourite GameCube game. I played it loads as a kid, and I'd never get further than the baby fight, but now I've beaten it 3 times, twice on the 3DS and once on the GameCube, and I still love it so much. While the 2 sequels, were definitely good, and I'd probably say they're overall better games, I prefer the more simple and quick game mechanics of the first game. There's not a lot of cutscenes where you're just waiting around. You clear one stage, maybe there's a tiny little phone call from EGAD, then you're straight back into it. With the other games, it kind of feels like you do one tiny thing, and then EGAD calls you every 2 minutes just to say basically nothing, and it just drags out loads. But with Luigi's Mansion, while this does make the game significantly shorter, it makes it 100% more replayable. You can just, hop straight into it, and boom, you're in the game. But oh boy, we are not done with the GameCube yet. We still have 2 more GameCube games to go over. The first one is Geist. Now, Geist is probably the weirdest GameCube game, and probably one of the weirdest Nintendo games, since it doesn't feel like that weird of a game in itself, but it feels like a really bizarre Nintendo game. First of all, it's 18 rated and mature in the USA, which is really unusual for Nintendo, and I believe Eternal Darkness and Geist were maybe the only 2 Nintendo games that were, higher than 16. But it's a first-person shooter where you can basically astral project your body as a ghost, and it's very weird. I've been meaning to get it, but it's pretty rare, so it's going to be hard for me to get it. But again, this is just a really weird thing for Nintendo to make. The last GameCube game we're going to be talking about is Wario World. Now, pretty much every Wario game is really weird in its own way. The only exception to this is really, Wario Land, which is just a pretty simple 2D platformer. But Wario World is a 3D platformer, and a weird one at that. The story is Wario's chilling in his castle, and then all of a sudden all his money gets turned into aliens. Yeah, that's quite weird, and the big boss is some alien, and you travel across these weird grassy, almost Pikmin-esque worlds. In fact, a lot of this game, to me anyway, has a very similar vibe to Pikmin, just, in terms of the enemies' design, and also just, the worlds in general, just looks so much like Pikmin for some reason. For a 3D platformer, it's got quite linear levels. Think, Super Mario 3D Land and World, or Super Mario Galaxy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I think the game looks decent enough. Nothing that I'd absolutely jump at the chance to play though. My god, is it an expensive game. And that's pretty much it for the GameCube library. I'm sure there are other really weird GameCube games out there, but none that I can think of really on the spot, and also none that I own. But we have one more game to go over that happens to be a Wii game. This isn't necessarily just this game. Frankly, the entire series is just completely weird, but it is the only game in the series that I actually have, and that is, you guessed it, WarioWare. And the one I happen to own is Smooth Moves. Now, I got this game recently, and while being really fun and really addictive, it is quite short. Now, why is it weird? Where do I start? Okay, so it begins with Wario finding a Wii remote. Then he gets chased by a boulder, then has to complete a series of very, very short mini-games to progress, and you have to make sure not to wipe out all your onions before you get crushed by a boulder. And then after that, all of a sudden, you're in a sports center with loads of cheerleaders, and Wario's now gone from the entire game. Well, most of the time anyway. When Wario does appear in this game, it's very minimal. Most of it is just playing bite-sized mini-games and trying to survive in different places like a haunted mansion, a science lab, a sports center, a car, and it can be really addictive at times. And if you ask me, is one of the best uses of the Wii Remote's motion controls. It works most of the time, but occasionally you will get a minigame where you're just like, what do you mean? I did pull out the gun. But the weirdest thing about this game is that it has basically no Nintendo characters other than occasionally Wario, and then all the others are just random cartoon characters. Now every single WarioWare game is exactly like this, so really this could count for all of them. It's just the only one I have is Smooth Moves. And that was a few very weird and bizarre Nintendo games. I'm sure I have missed some, so if your favourite weird-ass Nintendo game wasn't featured, then I am incredibly sorry about that. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.